In the spring of 2001, a mother in Battery Park City in Lower Manhattan gave her young son Daniel the classic neighborhood advice. If you can't find your way home, just head for the Twin Towers. If you remember that, she told him, you'll never get lost. The week after 9/11, Daniel asked one simple question: how will I find my way home now? And so our question, on October 7th, 2023, and in this harrowing year since, how will we find our way home now? It's not towers of glass and steel that have toppled in flames, but kibbutzniks' homes and children's toys, and the flower of youth at a music festival. Not Manhattan skyscrapers that have crumbled, but some of our core assumptions about what it means to be a Jew in the world. That our beloved Israel could be a safe haven, that the Israeli government could protect its citizens, that our people would not be turned to ash again. That anti-Semitism was always under the surface, but not florid and viral here in America. That coming to temple or dropping our kids at the ECEC, we would never worry about safety. That if we played a word association game and I said Jew, you would not say nervous or afraid. October 7 changed all that. Al Eila ani bochia, says the book of Lamentations. For these I weep. 1,200 killed, over 7,000 wounded, 251 hostages taken, some 100 remaining in captivity a year later, perhaps as many as half of those dead. Those of us from Temple who visited the devastated kibbutzim last year will never forget. Death and the remnants of life arrested in awful juxtaposition. A wheelchair, a pair of pink sneakers, a sukkah still standing from the day of Simchat Torah. The houses twisted by fire. A Dali nightmare where what is supposed to be straight and standing has melted over the edge of comprehension. Ein milim, we say in Hebrew. There are no words. No words for the devastation of that day. No words for the displacement of Israelis from their homes then and since, as the fronts of war have multiplied. And no words for the acts of heroism on that day. The courage of those who perished and the courage of the saviors. From the soldiers and kibbutz security teams who gave their lives to save others, to the Bedouin van drivers who drove back into the carnage to rescue more people from the Nova Festival, to Noam and Gali Tibon, the grandparents from Tel Aviv who impossibly fought their way south to Kibbutz Nachal Oz to rescue their family. When Noam finally banged on the door of the shelter, the first words his granddaughter Galia spoke after hours of enforced terror and silence were Saba Higia, Grandpa is here. Israel, understandably and justifiably, responded to the attacks of October 7th with a counterattack on Hamas, a counterattack that has become an overwhelming military offensive in Gaza that continues to this day, a war that is spread to multiple fronts in response to multiple threats and attacks from Hezbollah, Iran, and the Houthis in Yemen. A war that has taken a horrific toll on the lives of innocent civilians in Gaza and now Lebanon. And we as Jews in America have moved in and out of trauma, in and out of unity, in and out of moral certainty. We have lived with every feeling, every question about how a Jewish state should defend itself, about the combating of terror and the suffering of innocence, about how to respond to an enemy that hides itself behind human shields, questions about how Israel is judged in the media, about the corrosive effects of decades of occupation and conflict, about war and peace. As we stand at the crossing into a new year, our differences on matters so fundamental to the well-being of our people can be stark, passionate, and painful, whether within our temple community or within our own families. For some, the very act of questioning seems seditious. For others, asking questions is a Jewish responsibility and the only way through the shadows of a tragic time. And sometimes a person's fiercest debate is within him or herself. And so we might turn to another crossing, the one described in tomorrow morning's Torah portion. There on the banks of the Jordan, on the edge of promise, Moses challenged our ancestors, Uvacharta b'chayim, choose life. But this year, that timeless summons feels out of joint, somewhere between naive and impossible. Choose life after October 7th. Choose life with each week's casualties as the violence has metastasized since. Choose life while the hostages languish, as the children of Gaza stumble amid ash and rubble. Choose life when choosing one life might mean taking another. But that is precisely the challenge of this Kol Nidre night. When we look into our own hearts and into the soul of our people, Uvacharta b'chayim, what does it mean to choose life now? What does it mean for Israel? I believe that Israel has an unequivocal right to defend itself against Hamas and Hezbollah and their ilk. Our tradition has long taught that a war of self-defense is a just war. No nation should be expected to endure without response the brutal attacks on civilians that Israel suffered on October 7th. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg teaches that the Holocaust reminds us that if we really believe in the ultimate triumph of life and good, if we really believe in Tikkun Olam, then the assumption of power is mandatory. To choose powerlessness is a sin, he writes, an invitation for evil to triumph. I believe that Israel chooses life in exercising power to defend itself from murderous attacks. The question is, how should Israel's power be used? In 1938, two great religious leaders wrestled with a similar question. Mahatma Gandhi, in a letter to the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, suggested that the Jews of Germany use the Eastern religious practice of soul force as an appropriate form of nonviolent resistance to Nazi persecution. Buber rejected the idea, arguing that Gandhi did not grasp the magnitude of the Nazi evil. Sometimes a man must use force to save himself or his children. We should use force reluctantly, Buber wrote, in fear and trembling. But if there is no other way of preventing the evil from destroying the good, I shall use force and give myself into God's hands. And so, a Jewish ethic of power. Powerlessness before evil is no virtue, but how we exercise power matters greatly. To choose life is not to forsake power, but to exercise it with fear and trembling for the sacred value of every human being. The book of Deuteronomy declares a requirement of Israelite kings. When the king sits upon the throne, he shall have a copy of this Torah written for him. Let it remain with him and let him read in it all his life. Maimonides adds, when the king sets out to make war, the Torah must be with him. When he comes back from war, the Torah must be with him. What does it mean to carry the Torah into war? I believe it signifies that just wars need to be conducted by just means. I believe it means we are forbidden to rejoice over the death of the enemy. Our tradition teaches the familiar legend when the Egyptians were drowning in the sea, the ministering angels wanted to sing praises to God, but God rebukes them. The work of my hands are drowning in the sea, and you would sing praises. The Bible teaches that King David, glorified as a warrior, was not allowed to build the temple because of the blood he had shed in battle. Maimonides adds that it was because of the cruelty with which he shed it. And in what is perhaps the greatest moral dilemma before us, our tradition urges us to every extent possible to protect non-combatant populations. The late Rabbi Shlomo Goren, former Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel and hardly a dove, ruled, despite the explicit Torah commandment to wage war, we are enjoined to have mercy on the enemy too, and not to kill even in wartime, except when self-defense is imperative for conquest and victory, and not to harm a non-combatant population. In April of 2002, in the midst of the Second Intifada and Israel's armed response, Rabbi Michael Melchior, then Israel's deputy minister of foreign affairs, spoke at an Israel solidarity rally in Washington. It is crucial that we win this war, he said, but it's just as crucial how we win. In a battle in which our enemy is prepared to stoop to any level, we have to respect our values while still fighting for them. To maintain a semblance of humanity in the midst of a conflict, to find the balance between protecting the lives of innocent Israelis threatened by terrorism and protecting the Palestinian civilians living in those areas from which the acts of terror emanate. These are the questions, he continued, with which Israel, its army, and its civilians grapple every day, and so we should, just as we should feel the anguish at the terrible loss of civilian life among the Palestinians. And even if our answers to these questions are not always right, and indeed in many cases there are no right answers, we are asking the right questions. That, to me, is how a Jew thinks about war. With moral humility, with a lot of questions, and with a profound valuing of human life somehow amidst war's violence. In 1948, the founding of the state began a great experiment. For almost 2,000 years, Jews had developed ideas and ideals in the absence of power. Now the question would be, what happens to those ideas and ideals in the presence of power, in the company of our necessary guns and our necessary tanks and our relentlessly hostile enemies? The late scholar Stephen P. Cohen defined Israel's challenge: to know how to defeat hatred with superior force, but not with superior hatred. And when on tragic days the Israeli army takes innocent lives, it is cause for grief, not celebration. And so our questions, and so our grief for Gaza. As the result of Israel's ongoing response to October 7, we have witnessed what columnist David Brooks has called a hellscape in Gaza. Tens of thousands dead, including women and children. The alarming numbers of humanitarian workers and journalists who have perished. Bombed out neighborhoods, hospitals, schools, the devastation of hunger and disease. We regularly recite our tradition's teaching that every human being is created in God's image. I, like you, hold in my heart every victim of Hamas's brutality, every hostage whose freedom we fight for unstintingly, every IDF soldier dead or wounded. These are our people, our family. But if the image of God is to be something other than a comfortable cliche, then we need to say on this holiest day of the year that every innocent Palestinian that has died as a combined result of Hamas's heinous strategy and Israel's retaliatory strikes and international neglect is also created in the image of God. the tens of thousands dead, the 1.8 million displaced on the cusp of starvation and disease, all the ones walking a tightrope of survival. Al ele ani bochia. For these do I weep. Who is responsible for the hellscape that is Gaza? Surely Hamas above all. Perpetrators of the horrific attacks on October 7, dedicated to Israel's destruction, the ones who build hundreds of miles of tunnels under hospitals and schools and achieve diabolical strategic benefit by treating civilians as human shields placed directly in harm's way. And surely Israel bears its own responsibility. The moral responsibility to conduct this war on all its fronts in a way that takes every appropriate measure to protect civilians, and with the international community to achieve valid military objectives without completely crippling any possibility of long-term peace and cooperation in the region. A possibility that too many failures of leadership long before October 7th have dimmed. The king must carry the Torah into war. So the voice of our tradition takes issue with those who hold that just war is an oxymoron, that the chaos of conflict admits no rules. Whatever your position on political or military strategy, and I am certainly no expert, and however impossible it might sound in the chaos of asymmetrical warfare, it is our Jewish obligation to recognize that even in war's hell, there be a Sinai voice of humane decency. Do you remember that according to the Torah, Moses shattered the tablets of the Ten Commandments upon seeing the people worshiping the golden calf? And that Moses carved a second set inscribed by God? Well, our sages asked a question. We know, they said, that the second set, unbroken and whole, traveled in the Ark of the Covenant. But what became of the shattered pieces of the first set? And the rabbis of the Talmud answered, Luchot v'shivrei haluchot munachin ba'aron. The whole tablets and the broken tablets were kept together in the ark. Now, usually we use this text to teach the importance of maintaining the dignity of the broken alongside the whole. The rabbis in the Talmud used it to teach us about the dignity of aged scholars who might not be as sharp as they used to be. And we use it here at Temple to remind ourselves that we are all broken in some way. All deserve to be part of this amazing Jewish journey on the days we're feeling put together and the days we're not. But tonight I'd like to reverse the angle, to say that it is imperative, especially now, especially when we are feeling broken and vulnerable, to keep the whole tablets in mind. Because when we're feeling fragile and wounded, our survival imperiled, we are most at risk of losing sight of the sacred mission for which we survive in the first place. That's why it's important, precisely when we are feeling justifiably shattered, to keep in mind the Judaism of wholeness and decency that makes us proud to be Jews in the first place. That's why it's important, precisely when we're feeling under siege and want to draw the wagons into a circle, to hear the commanding ethical voice of the unbroken tablets of Sinai. Especially when the world is feeling broken, to keep alive Judaism's vision of wholeness and peace against all the odds. Especially when the threats and the enemies and our fear are real, to deny to fragmentation the last or only word. That is what the rescuers did. They insisted on the whole amidst the broken. That is what every Israeli citizen did, giving blood, giving food, providing housing, supporting grieving families and displaced persons, advocating with fierce resistance and resilience for the return of the hostages. And it's what we in our own way did too. We gave tzedakah, we participated in that fierce advocacy, we gathered in community, and most of all, in the face of such overwhelming darkness, we insisted on life. Because if your family had a bar bat mitzvah this year, you responded to October 7th. If you worshiped or studied, if you had a baby naming or a bris, if you put up a mezuzah to dedicate your home, if you kissed somebody under a chuppah, you said, we are more than shattered fragments. Every time you lit Shabbat candles, danced at the ECEC, came to YLE on a Sunday morning or a choir rehearsal during the week, you insisted on the whole tablets alongside the broken. And that is what every one of us has done, who at some point in this past year has struggled with the actions of Israel, but has stuck with this relationship. We have endured the broken, the hearts shattered by suffering, the decimations of war, the fatally misguided decisions of government, the damage to ideals, the chipping away at hope, because we believe in the vision of what a Jewish state can be. When we are feeling fragile, the whole tablets issue an ennobling challenge. When everything is shattered and we want to divvy the world up into who is for us and who is against us, the unbroken tablets of Sinai insist that we participate not just in a tribal circle, but in a particular covenant that calls us as Jews to recognize that all of humanity is our sacred concern. The unbroken tablets remind us that the God of Abraham is also the God of all creation. The one who sanctifies Israel is also Melech al Kol Haaretz, God of all the world. We come here as part of a particular people called to universal values of justice and compassion. We gain invaluable strength in the gathering of the tribe, but we recognize the moral limits of tribalism. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And so, amidst all of our brokenness, would the unbroken tablets of Sinai speak to us? Keep your eyes on the prize, they say. Love your family and love the stranger. Support Israel's right to exist and thrive in safety with every moment and every heartbeat. And do not turn away from the Palestinian plight. Choose life and choose decency. Live in a world of conflict and strive for peace. Recognize the threats, but do not let them define or distort who you are. Seek justice, but remember that justice can never be built on hate. Anti-Semitism is real, so resist it by committing to a living Judaism. The unbroken tablet Judaism of Torah and prophets and silent prayer and Shabbat song and matzah ball soup and the beauty of a Jerusalem morning and the possibility of God's presence in every breath. Bring your brokenness to, the whole tablets say, and never lose hope for healing. For the whole and the broken travel together in the arc of our life's journey and at this new year, even as we, for all of our sometimes strident disagreements, make our way together. At this crossing, on this edge of promise, as beclouded as it might sometimes seem, how will we find our way home now? Uvacharta b'chayim, say the tablets. Choose life. Shana Tova.